The Maasai sky was gray, heavy with clouds that heralded the harsh rainy season. The tall yellow grasses trembled under the heavy rain. In the midst of this bleak landscape, an old lion walked silently on tired legs. He had been abandoned by his pack months ago because he was no longer strong enough to hunt. His fur was frayed and soaked, scarred by time. His left hind leg was limping slightly, a sign of an old wound that had not yet fully healed. His eyes were sad, following the herds of Thompson's gazelles running in the distance. He knew he could no longer catch up with the agile prey. Instead, the old lion trudged across the open fields, hoping to find leftovers. His days were long hours spent searching for traces of hyenas or leopards to see if they had left any flesh or bones behind. However, the amount of leftover food was not much, and the lion became increasingly exhausted. This year, the rain came earlier, making the ground muddy and slippery. For 5 days, the old lion trudged through the rain, his empty stomach growling. He lost a lot of weight. His ribs were clearly visible under his thin skin. His body trembled from both cold and hunger, but he kept moving. Each of his weak roars almost disappeared into the sound of the falling rain. Sometimes he looked up at the cloudy sky, as if praying for a miracle. That afternoon, when the sun was hidden behind the rain, the old lion suddenly discovered a large puddle of mud in the middle of the field. He tried to cross it to find a way to higher ground, but each heavy step made him quickly slide into the thick mud. At first, he only sank up to his knees, but the rain kept pouring down, making the mud mushy. The lion struggled in panic, trying to escape from the swamp unwillingly. The more it struggled, the deeper its huge body sank. Its claws and fangs dug into the mud, but all its efforts were in vain. Half an hour passed. The lion was almost submerged up to its belly. Panic began to flare up. It growled in despair, but all around it was only rain and mud. Its heart was pounding, exhausted both physically and mentally. Time passed. The mud had dragged it down more than half its body. The old lion painfully realized that his body no longer had the strength to struggle. It was exhausted after 5 days of fasting and 3 hours of unsuccessful attempts. Its eyes were heavy, gradually closing as if it wanted to give up everything. In the last moment before falling asleep, the lion could still hear the rain pattering on its mane. Then it fell into a tired sleep, despite the mud encroaching on its body. On the other side of the field, Kamau, a Maasai conservationist, was driving a patrol car. Kamau was a man in his 30s, tough and dedicated. He had known every corner of the reserve for nearly 10 years. In the rain, Kamau diligently checked the areas prone to landslides or flooding. Suddenly, he saw a lion lying motionless a few hundred meters away. At first, Kamau thought the lion had died from the fierce rain and hunger. He stopped the car, put on his raincoat, and went closer to verify the situation. The sight before him surprised the lion was still breathing. The ragged fur and the deep mud made Kamau realize that this lion was on the brink of death. He knelt down and observed its very weak breathing. The rain continued to beat down on Kamau's back, but he didn't mind the wetness. He was confused and wondered if he should call his teammates for help. His satellite phone only worked intermittently in bad weather. Besides, his colleague's station was 4 hours away by car. Kamau knew that if he waited for his colleague, the lion would not last. He took a deep breath and made a bold decision: save the lion alone. This was the first time he had to rescue an old lion in such a harsh situation. Kamau hurried back to the car, rummaged through the rescue kit for a sturdy rope. He returned to the mud puddle and cautiously approached the lion. The lion seemed to sense the warmth from the human, its eyelids twitching slightly. It opened its eyes slowly, bewildered but no longer strong enough to resist. Kamau tried to tie the rope around the lion's belly, avoiding the dangerous claw area. This was not an easy task, as the liquid mud kept seeping into his boots. It took him a few minutes to secure the rope around the animal. Then Kamau backed away, holding on tightly to the relatively hard ground on the bank. He began to pull, using all his strength in his arms. The lion roared softly, but perhaps it also understood that he wanted to save it. In the heavy rain, the struggle between man and mud continued tensely. With each passing minute, the lion's body moved forward, leaving behind patches of mud. Kamau was tired, but he still persevered, pulling and encouraging the animal. He whispered, "Hold on, you will survive." Time seemed endless. His arms were limp. Finally, after about 30 tense minutes, the old lion escaped the mouth of deadly mud. Kamau gasped, kneeling on the ground to steady his breathing. The lion lay flat on the bank, his body covered in mud, his eyes half open and half closed. With what was left of its strength, it tried to lift its head, looking at Kamau intently. Their eyes met, the lion's gaze shining with gratitude and fatigue. Kamau stepped back, untied the rope, and quickly tidied up to ensure safety. He understood that lions were still dangerous beasts, even though they were exhausted. However, a feeling of pity arose in his heart for the old lion's harsh fate. He gently retreated to the car and sat in the driver's seat, temporarily observing its reaction. The lion trembled, trying to stand up but then collapsed. Kamau suddenly remembered that he had some spare meat in the car. He took a piece of meat and slowly stepped out, throwing it toward the lion. The fishy smell of the meat immediately made the lion's eyes light up. It slowly crawled forward, using its mouth to grab the meat and devour it. The mud stains on its mane shook slightly with each chewing motion. After eating, the lion raised its head to look at Kamau again, as if to say thank you. The rain was still falling, but it didn't seem as cold as before. Kamau nodded slightly, retreated to safety, and continued to observe from afar. The lion carefully stood up, trembling but with a little more strength after eating. It turned its head, looked at Kamau for a long time, then slowly walked towards the field. The raindrops falling on its thin back made its steps heavier. However, in the eyes of the old lion, there was still a glimmer of hope for survival. Kamau quietly returned to the car, started the engine, and continued his patrol. He looked back at the lion one last time in the rearview mirror, feeling warm and relieved. Behind the curtain of rain, the old lion's figure gradually disappeared, carrying with it the story of kindness in the midst of harsh nature. Dear friend, thank you for taking the time to follow the story. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to support us.